Do you like home decor pieces that you can leave out for more than one season? I know I do. I get tired of having to take things down, put new things up. So I have several projects for you guys today that I think you will enjoy. You can leave these out just for winter, or they will transition well with your other farmhouse or rustic decor. Thank you for stopping by Lavender and Lace today. I'm Alicia. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up, and I hope you will consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. And without further ado, let's get started with these projects. I found this gorgeous winter artwork on Creative Fabrica, and I will link that file for you guys in the description box. And I just printed that on a piece of 11 by 14 tissue paper. And I will also link some other videos where I do this tissue paper technique so you guys can get a better idea of the tutorial and everything that you need to do. I just removed that from the computer paper, and part of my design did rip when I was pulling off that tape. So I just went back in and cut that off, and I am able to piece that together just a little bit later on in this project. And I had previously painted one of these books. I did a few of these in my last video, so you guys can check that out. And I painted this with 3 coats of some Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster. And I just covered one side of my book to be able to apply my tissue paper design. And I really like this design because it had that dark line, and I was able to just line that up on the spine of this book. And I carefully just applied that tissue paper. I did not let my Mod Podge dry for this project. Sometimes I will do that and just use my little Cricut mini press to reactivate that Mod Podge and apply whatever I'm working with, whether that's tissue paper or a napkin. But this one, I actually wanted to get some wrinkles and creases in that tissue paper for this project. I want this book to look aged and antiqued. And I just repeated that for the spine and the other side of my book. And I just made sure that I creased that tissue paper along that spine of the book where it kind of folds up there. I do that first before I do any of the other part of the book, just so I can make sure that I can display this either open or closed and I won't have my design tear. And just to piece that back together where it ripped the design, I put just a little bit of extra Mod Podge, and it was easy to just line this up, and you can't even tell that I had to piece those two together. Just be careful as you are pressing down on your tissue paper so you don't rip that. And I took one of my jumbo nail files that you can get from the Dollar Tree and just went along the front and the back cover just to get some clean lines and remove that extra tissue paper. And I love artwork and I love books, so this just combines my love of both of those things into this project, and I absolutely love how this one turns out. I can't wait for you guys to see the finished product. And just to give this a little bit more age, I took some of my antique wax from Waverly and went across the entire surface and along the edges. This design wasn't quite wide enough to cover my book. I knew that before I printed it. But I just go in with that antique wax and age the extra edges there that didn't get covered with that tissue paper, and it just kind of blends everything in nicely. And that antique wax just make all of those wrinkles and creases really stand out and give you some really good detail on your book. And you can add just a little antique wax or more, just depending on your preference and what you want your finished project to look like. And just to seal everything in, I do go back in with another light coat of Mod Podge and cover everything up. And this will also help make sure that you get all of your edges sealed down and everything looks nice and neat. And I don't even remember the actual title for this book, so I knew I wanted to print out some pages from a favorite book of ours. We homeschool and we have a lot of books that we have enjoyed over the years, and one of our favorites is The Chronicles of Narnia. So I was able to find the entire first book in that set, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and I just printed off a couple of pages. And of course, I wanted these to look older and aged, so I added quite a bit of water to some of my antique wax, and I just went over the entire page with that mixture with one of my little foam pouncers. I thought this would be a good way to get some age on that computer paper so it wouldn't look bright white and like a brand new book. So I just did that for both of my pages until I was happy with the way that it looked. And I also took my foam brush that I had mixed the antique wax and the water with, and it had a lot of that mixture soaked up in there. And I just kind of slung that over the top of these pages and got some of those drips, and went back over that with a dry paper towel and blotted some of that excess water and just dried that with my heat gun. And this aged this paper really well. I love the finished product on that. You could maybe even add some yellow watercolor paint to that if you wanted it to have more of that antique vintage yellow color that paper will get. And just to apply these to my books, I kind of just measured them out and just drew a line with my pencil on that first page. And then I just went along the edges of that book and creased my paper. And that just gave me some guidelines to go by to cut down my book page. You could totally just measure out the pages of your book and use a ruler and mark your page that way if you wanted to, whatever process that you would prefer to get your pages cut down. And I just used my paper cutter to cut down my first and my second page. So actually, before I cut that second page, I lined it up with the first one. I wanted to make sure that the text lined up on the book pages so that it looked like it was actually printed in this book. And just to attach these, I just used a glue stick and went across all of the surface of both of these pages and just applied the printed ones that I had done. And the way that I am doing this project, you will be able to display it either open using an easel, or you can display it closed on that easel, or you could just have it laying on a coffee table, whichever you prefer. And that's one reason that I chose such a very pretty piece of artwork to go on the front. And this one is finished, and Graceland knew exactly what book this came from before she even read any of the text. So let me know what you guys think about this one. For this project, I grabbed my set of watercolor paints and some brushes. I also grabbed a book that I had picked up from the thrift store and 3 of these smaller canvases that you can get from the Dollar Tree. So to start this one, I just removed all of the plastic and the cardboard, everything from those canvases. And you're probably thinking, since I have canvases, maybe I'm going to be painting those, but actually I'm doing something a little bit different for this project. I picked 3 pages from this book, and this one had perfect aging around the edges of these pages, and I actually pulled out 4. I wanted kind of a practice piece because it has been a while since I have done any watercolor painting. I like to do small cards and things to have on hand to give to people, but it's just been a while, so I wanted to do a little bit of practice before I actually painted on the ones that I'm going to be using for this project. I don't really know how to tell you guys how I did this process. I just started by using some of the brown watercolor paint, and then I had 4 different colors of green. So I just kind of went back and forth with all of my different colors, different brush strokes, just kept playing around with that until I was happy with the designs. I knew I wanted to have a lot of different pine trees on these pages. This is just another good one that you can have for wintertime, or you could leave this up year round in your decor. This one is just one of those that you can transition easily like that. And once I was happy with some of the designs on my practice page, I started painting all of my other pages. I put the brown down first as those tree trunks and just went back in once again with all of those different colors of green. I will tell you this, if you do watercolor painting, I like to start with the darker colors first and then just go back in with some of the lighter colors to give a little bit of highlights. You can just easily blend these watercolors that way. So just play around with that until you're happy with how it looks. Do some practice pages if you want to. That's one of the great things about watercolors. They're very inexpensive, and you can just play around with those and practice and don't feel like you're wasting a lot of your product. And once all of my paintings were dry, I did want to go in and rip all of the edges of these pages. I just wanted them to have a little bit more of that rustic look. And while I was ripping these pages, I did notice that this paint wanted to kind of come up and remove from that page, and it did turn my fingers a little bit green. I don't know if it's just this type of paint that I was using, but I do seal my pages a little bit later to keep that from happening. And just to give my pages a little bit more of an antique and vintage feel, I just took some of my antique wax and a small little chip brush and went around all of the edges. And that will also make these pages stand out just a little bit better when we apply them to our canvases. And I wanted them to stand out, like I said, from these canvases. So I decided to paint just the edges. Make sure that you do the outside edges as well if you're going to display these on a wall. That just gives you a nice, clean, professional look to these. And I used my Waverly chalk paint in the color moss. I thought that would be a very good complementary color to all of the pine trees on my book pages. And I decided to go back in with some of that antique wax on my moss colored paint just to give that a little bit more age as well. Just use my small chip brush again and kind of scrub that into the canvas actually, so it would look like it was a part of that canvas and not something that you had just painted on. And don't forget to distress the outer edges as well. I almost forgot to do that on these. And to apply my book pages, I used my matte Mod Podge and a small paintbrush to smooth that out over the entire surface. And then I just applied my book page and smoothed that out from working from the center outward as I applied that to the canvas. And when your page starts getting wet, it will wrinkle up just a little bit, and that paint will also start coming off on your fingertips. You can see it there. Wasn't happy about that. So I decided to go over the top of that with another light layer of Mod Podge, and I tried to work very quickly with this because I was afraid that watercolor would bleed when I went back in with that Mod Podge, and it did kind of spread out a little bit more on those book pages. but it wasn't anything too bad. And once these are dry, these are ready to display, and I think these turned out absolutely beautiful. What do you guys think about this one? I found this wall decor piece at Hobby Lobby probably at the beginning of last year. I'm always on the hunt for things that they have on sale, and this one was marked down to, I think it was $2 to $3 for this one. I actually picked up two of these, and I also had some of this self-adhesive wall tile left over from previous projects, and I picked that up at Dollar Tree. And if you wanted to, you could totally take this wood sign wall decor piece apart. That might make this project a little bit easier. I just didn't take the time to do that when I was crafting. I just traced out those squares onto that wall tile and just cut that out. And you have to be careful when you are doing this, because when you cut that tile piece, it does just remove all of the plastic and the adhesive strip on the back, and it can make that just a little bit tricky to cut those out cleanly and get nice clean lines. So I did go back in with those corners and just kind of trim that up a little bit better so it would fit onto each of my squares. And I played around with how I wanted those to be laid out on my squares. I wanted them to be a little bit different and not have the same pattern in the same way. And once I was happy with how that looked, I used some of my Aleene's, however you say that, the tacky glue on the backs of these. You could use hot glue. I just decided not to do that because I was afraid it might leave some bumps and ridges underneath that tile. Just place that onto the top of each of your squares, and I let mine dry overnight before I did the next step on this project. So I painted each of these with a couple of coats of my Waverly chalk paint in the color moss. You could do whatever color you wanted for this to match your decor. I just opted to do the green because I like to have different shades of greens and blues in my decor for winter as well as my everyday decor. And I had a little scrap piece of that tile that I wanted to kind of play around with how I wanted to antique these. So I started by putting down some of my antique wax from Waverly all over the surface of that. And I liked the way that looked, and I just wiped off some of the excess. I was trying to just get kind of an aged, rusty tin look for this project. And then I took some of my Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster and just did some dry brushing over the top of that, just to see what kind of effect that would give me for this. And I like the way that looked as well, but on my actual project, I decided to put down that plaster colored chalk paint first. That will just highlight some more of the detail on this tin piece. And I just go back in with my antique wax and go over the entire surface of each of my squares. And I love the effect that I get with putting that paint down first and then going back over that with that antique wax. It just gives this a really vintage rustic vibe, and it looks a little bit rusty, I think. And then I just grabbed my book that I use for projects to grab out some scrap pages. I just needed one piece for this project. I folded that in half, and I didn't even use my scissors for this because I wanted to have some of those rough edges on my paper. And then I just took that half and folded it in half once again. So I got 4 pieces from one piece of paper. And then I just did an accordion fold on each of those pieces, making a little fan. And I made 4 of these to start with, but I actually only end up using 2 of these to complete this project. You could use all 4 if you wanted to, totally your preference. And just to make these into a circle shape, I took a small piece of jute twine and tied that into a knot in the center of my little pieces of paper. Try to get that in the center as much as possible. If not, your fans will not turn out as good. They won't look as nice and neat. And just to attach those, I put some hot glue on one side, folded that up, and held that in place until it was secured. Just repeated that for the other side as well. And I did make these a little bit bigger than I wanted them to be. So I just took my scissors and kind of trimmed those down. And I decided to put one of my paper fans on every other wood piece. I didn't want to cover up all of that tin that I had worked so hard to get aged and antiqued. And I wanted to show you guys this cookie tin. This was actually my granny's, and she kept all of her buttons in there. So all of these are hers. The tin is very old, and all of these buttons are very old. I love using these. I inherited this when she passed away several years ago, and I just found some that I really liked that I thought would complement this project nicely, and I glued those where I had tied my little paper piece to hide that jute twine. And just to finish this off, this was kind of an afterthought. You could totally do this before you glue these on there. I just went back in with some of that antique wax and went over the little paper fans as well as all of the edges of my wood pieces. And this one is finished and ready to go. I think this one is absolutely gorgeous, and I love how this one turned out. It looks great with either winter or just your farmhouse decor. What do you guys think about this one? I wanted to make some more wintry or farmhouse pillow covers for a couple of my pillows that I have in my living room. So I just measured these, and these were 17 by 17. And I had found this really big blanket at my thrift store for $1. I actually started looking for sweaters and things to do pillow covers, and I found this one, and it was a 50 by 70 inch, I think. So I was like, this is really good deal. You can get this for $1 and have a lot of fabric in this. It was super soft and the color that I wanted. And I just started this by removing that seam along 2 of the edges of the blanket. I actually didn't cut that off the entire blanket. And I just used my little ruler and my rotary cutter to do that. And once I cut that seam off, I realized how much this blanket actually sheds. It got everywhere. I had to vacuum the floor and get a lint ruler to get all of that off of my sweater and my leggings that I had on. So I was really regretting using this blanket for this project. I think maybe the sweaters would have been a better option, but if you guys find a blanket like this for $1, I mean, it's a pretty good deal, so you might want to pick it up, but you might want to really pay close attention to the type of fabric that this is. So I just cut down some smaller size squares from my blanket fabric. I did 18 by 18 inches. That just gives me room for a seam allowance when I sew these together. And you guys definitely need to pick up one of these rotary cutters. If you do a lot of fabric projects, it just makes your life so much easier, and it cuts this fabric very quickly. So I cut 4 pieces of my fabric because I'm going to be making 2 of these pillow covers. And I did have to go back in with my ruler and just make sure that I had good straight lines. Sometimes I don't do very well with getting everything straight when I'm cutting fabric, and this one was stretchy, so it made it a little bit more challenging to work with as well. And once I had all of my pieces cut out, I did go in and just put those right sides together and clip those together with my Wonder Clips that I like to use for all of my fabric projects. These are super handy. I like to have these to just easily clip together your fabric pieces. So I clipped together all 3 sides, and I left the bottom completely open. I didn't leave just a smaller space. I just took these to my sewing machine once I had everything clipped together and sewed around all 3 edges. If you're a good seamstress, you could do a zipper closure at the bottom and just make that be able to zip closed. Or I actually opted to just leave that open on the bottom and have it kind of like a pillowcase so that it is easy to put on and off of my pillow. You could use some of the iron-on Velcro. I actually looked for some of that at Hobby Lobby and couldn't find it. So I just decided to leave this open and just kind of tuck in that bottom piece of fabric, and you would never know it. So once you have everything pinned and clipped together, I just took it to my sewing machine and sewed up those 3 sides. Then you will just turn that right side out and you can put that on your pillow. Just as simple as that, and then you have a very quick pillow cover, something that you can easily change out for seasons. You can find all different colors of these blankets or sweaters, whatever you decide to use. What do you guys think about this one? Thank you all so much for watching today. I enjoy meeting with you all each week. And if you have not subscribed, I hope you will consider doing so already. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed the projects. And I would also love to connect with you on Facebook and Instagram. You can find links to both of those in my description box. Leave me a comment. I always enjoy reading those and connecting with you all there. And I also have a community tab on my page, so I put updates and different fun things there that you might want to check out. And I will see you guys in the next one.